hard to believe, but next April will mark 30 years of a democratic South Africa. Later in 2024, we'll return to the polls. It's an important time to reflect on how far we've progressed and to consider how to chart a way forward to rectify some really significant problems that we're facing: unemployment, inequality, neglect of infrastructure, corruption, a lack of skills, crime. We all know the story. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Marcel Nagar from the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Nagar, thank you so much for joining us. You and your colleagues at the University of Johannesburg, along with the Mapungubwe Institute for Reflection, also the presidency, put together this report looking at how well South Africa's done since democracy. I think what was interesting is that the 2006 version of that report showed progress, but the 2022 version showed a deterioration. Just talk to me about the findings of that report.
So our report made 4 key findings. The first being that South Africa continues to be characterized by a dual economy in which wealth continues to be concentrated in the hands of the white minority. As we know, South Africa is a highly unequal society, one of the most unequal societies within the world, and poverty continues to be a challenge that we face.
Yeah.
Figures from 2022 show that 63% of Black people in particular live in very poor, dire circumstances. The report also found that we have very poor service delivery. We also rank worst in terms of intergenerational income mobility. The World Economic Forum, for example, found that it would take a South African who is born into poverty about 9 generations to reach the country's median income. And also, interestingly enough, our report finds that racial disparities that is indicative of our history of apartheid still characterizes South African society. And here, for example, it found that white and Indian people, they have a better standard of living, better access to quality education, and better employment outcomes than South Africans who are Black and colored. And what's also important to note that our report has found is that Black women are the most vulnerable within South African society, and they face a double burden of both racism and patriarchy.
Yeah. I mean, it's very disheartening. But we've backslid since the first 10 years of democracy, haven't we? We're actually making relatively okay progress up until around when? When did things start to go horribly wrong, and why?
I suppose that is a very complex question, and I would answer it by looking at both the international factors that were at play as well as the domestic factors. So as we know, we live in an intensely globalized world where global shocks that occur in other parts of the world impact us here in the global south more than it would, for example, in America or Europe.
Yeah.
So certain global events such as the 2008 economic recession, as well as the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, and currently the Russia-Ukraine war, all has had a negative impact on us here on the African continent, as well as here in South Africa, and it affects the poor the most. And then looking and answering this from a domestic perspective, I would say that since Nelson Mandela's administration, there has been a lack of development-oriented political leadership. We saw that in Zuma's administration, where there was a widespread corruption, state capture, and a moral decay within government. And all of this has impacted government's ability to pursue inclusive socio-economic development.
Okay, so we all know, about state capture. We know about the hollowing out of institutions, and we know that corruption literally took money that was meant to go to poor people, and it went into someone's back pocket. But that was supposed to start changing when Cyril Ramaphosa came into power around, what was it, 2019? Did your report look at whether things have started to get slightly better in the last few years?
Unfortunately, it didn't find any improvements beyond that of mortality rates, which have increased.
Yeah, and of course people are living longer because since sort of the mid, 2005 or so, 2006, HIV treatment is now available, so people are at least living longer. I want to speak to you about glimmers of hope, because I think we all are good at diagnosing the problem. We know what's gone wrong. Just recently, the two things that strike me is that the CEOs, the big companies, are now saying, we're signing a pact with government, we're going to help you, we've got to work together. We saw that during COVID as well. We're seeing it on the ground in Rivoli tonight, where there are private security companies working in a support capacity with the police. You say sort of at the end of the article, social cohesion programs and government initiatives must address the pressing socio-economic and political challenges if we are to build a close-knit society. Do commitments like that, that I've just explained, private security companies as one example, big companies saying we've got to do this together, we can help you, is that the sort of thing you're talking about that we need to see more of? Or do you have other ideas in mind?
I think that is exactly the initiatives and the programs that we need to focus on. And it all goes back to the president's first SONA, where he speaks about rebuilding the social compact between government, civil society, and the private sector. And I think that if we pool our resources together and band around all these socio-economic challenges, that will be able to uplift many people out of poverty and achieve inclusive development to the benefit of all.
All right. Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. Much to think about there. That, of course, is Dr. Marcel Nagar from the University of Johannesburg. Now,